Lovely Peach, you watching this video, could you do me a favor and write in the comments, you don't even have to post it, just for yourself. If you're feeling brave, you can post it after, but you don't have to, it's entirely up to you. Could you write in the comments, please, your answer to the question? If I say to you, let's eat some Asian food, what is it that comes to mind? Describe it to me, please. Let's make everybody hungry. Hi, Peaches. My name is Shaaba. Welcome back to my channel and thank you for clicking on another video. Also, Peaches, if you haven't already, please remember that you can subscribe. Maybe it'd be like a little early Christmas present. I'd be forever grateful. Bit of a weird one today, but I'm asking the question, am I Asian? This is a trick question, I think. I am Asian. I certainly don't want people in the comments trying to tell me that I am not. I've actually had this a lot in the past, funnily enough, mostly from other Asian people. Eastern Asian people in particular who are like, babe, you're not Asian, you're Indian. And I get it. Like, I'm not mad. If you don't know, you don't know. Like this commenter here. And very often it is followed up with the whole, you are Indian, not Asian. Silly. It got to the point, this is very recently, I had a comment with someone asking, are you Indian? And somebody else replied on my behalf. And they were like, yeah, she is. There was nothing but confidence in that response. 1,000,000%, no fault here. Just to clarify to anybody who needs to know, I'm not actually Indian. I'm Mauritian, which technically means I am part Asian and also part African, because Mauritius sits in the African continent, much like many of the people in Mauritius. In terms of my ancestry, it's a huge melting pot. I'm a little bit Indian, for sure. I'm a little bit Eastern Asian, for sure. I'm a little bit African. I'm a little bit French. And that's because Mauritius is a beautiful melting pot of culture and identity and heritage, and we don't think too hard about why that came about because it all goes back to the days of slavery, but the end result is quite lovely. So I'm not Indian. That's like me saying to an Eastern Asian person, you're not Asian, baby, Chinese. When you may not actually be Chinese, you just have Eastern Asian features. See, I always thought I was Asian. I never had to question it until today when I had to Google it. And the reason being is because one of my favorite platforms, my favorite platform ever, not naming names, hosted an AAPI event. What's AAPI for those not in the know? It stands for Asian, American, and Pacific Islander. Other variations of the term include API, which is just Asian and Pacific Islander. Americans, we love you, babe, but there is a huge world issue with American culture feeling like it's the only culture or the main culture. And newsflash, for those of you who need to hear it, Asians do exist elsewhere. It's okay, babes. We still love you, Americans. I forgive you. You can grow. In other parts of the world, these groups are often referred to as just Asian or Asian and Arab. There are different variations. Anyway, Asian event, right? Love it. Couldn't believe that it existed. I felt so excited coming across it. I felt heartwarmed, truly, that a big platform was doing things, making efforts to provide that representation when we don't often see it. And I was also feeling a huge level of excitement to scroll through, take my time and find a gorgeous collection of talented Asians all in one room that I could like hype up, lift up, follow and learn from, right? That's the vibe. Making positive change, representing what's not to love. What I did find was Asian beings, yes. Talented Asian beings, yes. Gorgeous, talented Asian beings, yes. But not a single one of them looked like me. And this is no shade to Eastern Asian communities at all. And I do want to make that very, very clear. There should absolutely not be like a culture war stoked between Eastern Asian and South Asian communities. It's not what I'm calling for. It's not at all what I'm advocating for. I am noting factually that everybody at the event, except for 2 men who were not invited as guests or in any capacity of being South Asian, but who were literally just invited because it was their job to be there, and 1 small South Asian face of a man in the background who wasn't named. Apart from those 3 people, every single other face that I saw at this AAPI event was entirely Eastern Asian. Granted, I didn't attend the event. The only thing that I'm seeing are the photos that the team have chosen to put up, but still, the team chose to put up these photos, which even if that was an output in itself, is still a discussion and a conversation that we should be having. And second point to acknowledge, because again, I wasn't at the event, I am assuming that all of these people were Eastern Asian based on visual appearance. There was no honey glazed chicken wing brown skin in that room, baby. I didn't see it. I'm not sure I spotted any kind of Asian identity that wasn't Eastern Asian. And again, not saying that there is not meant to be a space for that, absolutely, but don't be calling yourself an AAPI event if all you're doing is representing for one group of that community. Because I genuinely thought, hang on a minute, I've got this wrong. AAPI is not for me. That is not a group. That is not a term that is supposed to encompass my identity. That is not for brown people. I must clearly not be Asian then. And I looked it up online. I was this uncertain. And spoiler alert, I am Asian. Over 40 different countries make up Asia. It's quite a large span of cultural, political, familial, so many different nuances and contexts that even the API Institute acknowledges that it wouldn't be able to do justice to properly summarize it without all this additional context, because it's just so wide in scope. But this idea of being Asian typically falls within the following categories. We have Central Asians, who are very often erased and not included in API discussions. We have Eastern Asians, who are almost always what comes to mind when people are asked the question, what does Asian look like to you? Which is why I asked you about that question at the beginning. I'm so interested to look down at the comments and see, for those of you who are brave enough to post it, what was said there in terms of the food, and if actually that is reflected in this too. We have Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, which is a very localized context to American culture as to what Asian means. I totally get why it's here. I totally understand its existence. I'm just acknowledging that the rest of the world often doesn't have that in the way that America does, purely because of geographical standing. We have Southeast Asians, who again are often erased or at the very best really lumped in with Eastern Asians. Like, it's not seen as a real separate thing in wider conversations. And we have South Asians, where even the most woke Americans that I know, who I've spoken to, who literally work in the fields of diversity, are just like, oh, I thought you were just Indian. Like, that's what we call it here. And this list from the API is not exhaustive. It's also not categories that are universally known. Like, not everybody will absolutely conform to using and categorizing Asia in this way. I'll give you a prime example. The API Institute even use a term West Asians, which is a term that even they recognize is quite contested. A lot of the people who would fall into this category of West Asian don't identify as West Asian. In the UK, for example, you probably find a lot of this group self-identifying as Middle Eastern in some way, or on ethnicity forms, there's like a separate category or a subcategory of Asian, which is often Arab and Middle Eastern. But America is gonna America, it seems, and so we all fall under one quilt bag. Census data in America also really confusingly categorizes API or Asian identities in a different way to API or AAPI. We've got Asian, American Indian, and Hawaiian and Pacific Islander. And as you can see, the Asian community makes up over 27 million people in the United States alone, and also account for a very large part of the global majority. So it's not like it's a small number that's never spoken about or not really a lived experience that we see day to day and is kind of erased in that sense. And what really confuses me about this conversation is that, especially in recent years, representation for Asian communities has absolutely boomed. Specifically in Western culture, Sandra Oh, Michelle Yeoh, Brenda Song, Brindle, Lucy Liu, Gemma Chan. Can you see that I'm trying to like particularly uplift women here? There's even been a noticeable uptick, at least in my experience, of South Asian reps specifically. Mindy Carling, Priyanka Chopra Jones, and Ambika Mod, Maitri Ramakrishnan, and this is specifically as well in shows targeted to young people on big platforms. We're not just talking like indie shows. We're not just talking Bollywood that's like leaked its way over. Oh my god, Avantika, how could I have forgotten? She's like one of my favorite actresses at the moment. Even the new upcoming Doctor Who companion, Varada, is South Asian. I'm so excited for the new season. It just keeps getting better. Kamala Harris, one of the most spoken names of this year, is part South Asian. And honestly, even though we've got a long way to go, Asian representation as a whole is not a new thing. Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, Vera Wang.
You don't alter Vera Wang.
Dev Patel. These are names that like I've known from when I was quite a bit younger. Tiger Woods. I didn't know he was part Asian. I had to Google that to like really make sure, but it's true. And I absolutely will acknowledge that South Asian representation is significantly less apparent the further back we go. And for the whole Asian community, representation is always a good thing and we can always be doing better. The makeup within the Asian umbrella maybe explains a little bit as to why where America is such a leading force in how the world forms its opinions. Indian Americans, this kind of South Asian segment is so small, isn't a huge makeup of this demographic, and maybe that's why when we think Asian, we typically think Eastern Asian before we think anything else. But even still, with all of this gorgeous representation at the moment, please tell me why I'm still seeing Asian events that only have Eastern Asian people. And again, not specifically to cater for Eastern Asian people, but saying that they are accommodating all Asian people. Tell me why in 2024 to 2025 I am still having to Google. I'm gaslighting myself like, am I Asian? Google didn't even tell me a straight up answer. I had to re-Google. Is South Asian included in AAPI? Does API include Indian people? Does API include brown people? And dude, if I as an adult brown if I, as an adult brown person, am having to question this and Google this, the system is clearly not working. And you know what? It's not just me being dumb. I'm not alone. The term API is used to refer to over 50 ethnic groups and over 100 different languages. But still, when you think Asian, you don't think of people like me, and it's because of that. Dr. Siraji has spoken about how a lot of South Asian people don't feel comfortable taking that little Asian box on the ethnicity forms. And I think a large part of that, which is a ripple effect on the fact that when people think of Asian, they have a very specific sort of visual and experience in mind is that we don't share the same experiences. And of course, this isn't something that we're educated about growing up in school. In fact, even though Black culture is significantly undertaught in schools and needs to be shared so much more to the whole population, even to this day, I still know a lot more about how Black people are treated in culture and history than I do Asian people, South Asian people and Eastern Asian people included, with incredible media like Self-Made and The Help and Hidden Figures, and with some, albeit not enough at all, history classes telling us a little bit about things like the slavery movement. I know about Rosa Parks, I understand how segregation and apartheid worked in terms of Black culture, but actually I have no idea where brown people fit within this. And I say brown because I'm obviously looking at this from a very biased lens of trying to understand my people and how my families would have been treated, and there just aren't answers for that. There was even this Doctor Who episode, I don't know why I'm going on about Doctor Who so much, it's because I love the show, where Jodie was a doctor. Is a really good episode, and they explored the story of Rosa Parks, and Yasmin, who's one of the companions at the time, is a brown person in America and is like, where do I go? And I still don't know the answer to that. It was very relatable. There are definitely some overarching stereotypes that do kind of bind Asian communities together beyond just this very wide sense of geography. But even then, those stereotypes, this positive sense of stereotype too, still doesn't fit all of the communities and types of Asian people that the API term attempts to cover. These stereotypes are really important to explore as well, right? Because whilst they might not be true, they do lead quite often how the majority of people respond to groups who are outgroups to them. And you can be the most woke person, the most unbiased person, the least discriminatory person in the world, and you can still have unconscious biases. It's just what we have in terms of psychology. There will always be in-groups and out-groups. Our heads, for matters of survival, will always try and find patterns and feel closer to the people who are more familiar with us than people or beings or objects that are not. And those stereotypes, be them positive or negative, are the waters eroding on a cliff that lead to constant behaviors that then form how our society reacts, which is why it's important to look at them. And as I said, some of them can be really positive. Asians are often known to be smart.
Hey, Susmita, you ready for the test?
To be wealthy, to be studious. I'm sure these are things you probably would have heard of, or maybe even assumed yourself from time to time. But again, that's not something that is often extended as an idea, as a stereotype, to all kinds of Asian people. And when you compare this to other POC communities, like Black communities, for example, who often deal with very negative stereotypes as the dyadic comparisons. Again, this isn't me saying that these are my views, I'm just saying that the stereotypes that exist often talk about Black people not being wealthy. That's the association that places like news and media will create and use to then influence behavior, which is not a fantastic thing. But just like there are stereotypes that seem to overarchingly encompass the Asian communities, there are also stereotypes that really do not. And yet these are stereotypes that humanity as a whole really influences the way that they interact and behave and act with Asian communities. For example, religious connotation and religious discrimination and race. Even if you are not Muslim, just by being or appearing to be South Asian or Arab in any kind of way, having brown skin, having South Asian or Arab features, there are very few people who fit that aesthetic and have not had Islamophobia directed towards them, regardless of whether they're religious in any way or not. After 9/11, for example, there was a huge rise in hate and discrimination and judgment towards South Asian communities, and that's absolutely not something that Pacific Islanders and Eastern Asian people faced. Similarly, with everything going on right now in terms of major political affairs, this is also not really a conversation that affects Eastern Asian people or Pacific Islanders in the same way that affects South Asian communities. And most importantly, Middle Eastern communities. Totally flipping that on its head when that really tiny thing, called the global world pandemic happened and the entire world went into shutdown. It was Eastern Asian communities that was experiencing a huge and unjustified rise in discrimination levels, in judgment, in the way that people were treating them. It was disgusting and it was horrible to see. And I know that as a South Asian person in particular, even though that falls under the Asian umbrella, that is not something that I ever could say that I could relate to. And it isn't just Eastern Asian and South Asian communities that don't like this lumping together. Pacific Islanders as well have pointed out that the term AAPI is not a fantastic thing. Within their communities, there aren't people who actually identify with the Asian label, and that is a really important thing to be able to do, to relate to the marginalized term that the world has given you, because if you don't, when it comes to matters like equal rights and discriminatory movements, things like #StopAsianHate, there is a huge dissonance that actually goes against the movement and makes it significantly less effective. And that comes from two directions, right? Because there's a huge level of discomfort that comes from people who feel like they're being forced. There's a term that's being being placed upon them that they can't relate to. At the same time, there's a bunch of people who are like, oh, well, because you have this label, I'm going to treat you as an authority in this matter. And that's not something that they want or that is wise for that movement to have. And actually, when this specific movement, #StopAsianHate, happened, I didn't even know about it. And it's not from lack of trying. Trust me, it's not from a lack of not being exposed to news and political affairs. It didn't land on my plate, and it wasn't something that I knew encompassed me. And I am not, again, the only South Asian person to feel this way. Dr. Siraji reflected that it's a movement that many South Asian people stand in solidarity with, but don't feel like they themselves are properly connected to. I genuinely believe that this group of Asians makes like no sense. And the only reason that it exists, specifically in the form of AAPI, is because this term acts as a miscellaneous quilt bag to gather up everybody who doesn't fit into the three main segments that America often has discourse about, which is white people, black people, and Hispanic and Latino people. And that's the problem about good old American egocentrism, because America does it, now the rest of the world also does it, even when the groups don't actually reflect in that way. Canada, for example, in their own domestic policies, often separates Eastern Asian, South Asian, Pacific Islander communities. And that's because their makeup is entirely different. If you ever came here in the UK, specifically if you go to places like London or Birmingham, you'd be so surprised to see that all of these groups are bunched together. It just makes no sense. And it's a tricky balance, right? Because whilst there is definitely strength in numbers and solidarity, that solidarity can also come in allyship. It's a well-known marketing principle, right? You can't relate to everybody. If you cast the net too wide and try to relate to too many groups, everybody that does fall within that branch then feels like they're not represented or they're not seen, and that the things that they're really passionate about fighting for and the equalities that they're striving for, because they take such different journeys, don't work in tandem. And there are absolutely times where the differences need to be highlighted more, like the LGBT plus community. LGB refers to sexuality, T refers to gender identity. They're not the same thing, but they're similar enough to fall within the same community, for sure. But now, trans rights in particular, as a separate group, is really being uplifted and platformed. And understandably so, because right now, this is the house that's on fire the most. This is the group that needs a lot of our help. And so the rest of the community that falls within this sort of like Uber umbrella, the second tier umbrella of LGBT people, and then this even additional tier of umbrella, allyship, and just general society, right, can all come in solidarity to help that one group. And then also at places like Prides, it's important to both have those individual groups, but also groups together, where the LGBT plus community can come together as a whole and say, hey, regardless of our differences towards these issues of gender identity, gender expression, gender sexuality, there's a commonality there that we can celebrate and uplift all voices to make an even bigger song. And that is incredible. And I think that works in the same way that we have POC people, a term that describes all people who are not white, people of colour, or the global majority, another term that's often used. That's the bigger group, right? Within that, Asian itself is not nuanced enough to capture the needs of all of the communities that you're trying to like shove inside it. Because yes, whilst there are common threads and identities that sort of weave between different Asian characteristics beyond geography, there are also huge differences that cause problems to each of the subcultures, which are then not fought for if they're lumped together as a whole. Things like religious obligation and dogma that absolutely exist more so for South Asian and Arab communities than they do elsewhere. Things like gender imbalances and the issues of intersectionality that fall within sexuality and gender identity, which again affects South Asian people in a significantly more negative way than Eastern Asian communities, where, again, I'm not saying it's perfect, but have significantly less stigma as a whole than South Asian communities. Things like fashion expectations and body positivity and beauty standards, where both Eastern Asian and South Asian communities have a lot to work through, but in very opposite ways. South Asian communities, particularly medically, right, have a much bigger issue to do with health-related problems of obesity, whereas Eastern Asian communities have a much bigger health-related issue to do with a pressure to feel much smaller. And obviously, I'm just talking about two groups here. I've taken Eastern Asian and South Asian communities because they're the sort of biggest within the two, but that also doesn't take into regard the huge other spectrum that falls under the AAPI umbrella, like Pacific Islanders, like people who have specifically two-spirit identities, where that aspect of gender identity functions in a totally different and amazing and fascinating way compared to how South Asian perception of it is, and perhaps even Eastern Asian perception of it is. And then Pacific Islander requirements are understandably even more nuanced because they're so based on this idea of geography and locality. Issues like land and rights to property and preservation of culture, even broader issues that affect all of those communities, like cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation, affects all of these sub-communities very differently. There is a Chinatown or equivalent in every single main city around the world. I think it's the most incredible thing. I love it. It's very much held in high regard, and yet at the same time, Pacific Islanders are fighting what feels like a losing battle sometimes to preserve exactly what they stand for and the land that they have. And we just lump them together. Like make that make sense. How are they both under the same umbrella? It's also not just about discrimination. There are other real world impacts that truly affect these communities too. Going back to the medical example, South Asians are hugely underrepresented in medical trials. And don't get me started on conversations surrounding mental health. So the point is, the term AAPI is clearly not working. And even within these very important societal conversations, the people who have the best meaning, people like me, are getting confused. Here's a prime example. Bridgerton. I love that show. To be an extra on that show. Bridgerton is amazing. If you haven't watched it, you should totally watch Bridgerton. For anyone who doesn't know, they've taken the conversation of race and platformed it in a really refreshing, unusual, and amazing way. And the music slaps. Each season of the show, there's a leading relationship that they really focus on. The first one was Daphne and Simon. White woman, black man, Daphman. Terrible couple name. Next season was Kate and Anthony. South Asian woman, white man, Canthony. Acceptable couple name. Then we have the spin-off, Queen Charlotte, King George, black woman, white man, greatest love story ever to be told, ultimate tragedy, I will die on this hill, Sharoj, Georgelet, Garlet, maybe? And most recently, Penelope and Colin, white woman, white man, Pollen, best couple name ever. You get the vibe. Somebody then posted this online. Kicking my feet and giggling because we finally get an Asian lead character for Bridgerton season 4. Firstly, how beautiful is Yeren Ha, who plays Sophie, the new leading lady in the upcoming season 4 of Bridgerton, to be the love interest of Benedict? Sophadict, maybe. Benefi. Aw, Benefi is cute though. Regardless of the couple name, Eastern Asian woman and white man, and a lot of people were unhappy about this post. Meanwhile, Kate Sharma, am I a joke to you? I know you didn't mean it that way, but Kate is also Asian. Kate Sharma in the corner, like, don't want to invalidate Kate's impact. Tell me you've skipped geography without telling me you've skipped geography. So much hate. So Kate is from Venus. Was Kate a fever dream? Last time I checked, India was part of Asia. The new Viscountess would love to have a word with you. You get the drift. And there were some people who didn't acknowledge it at all. A black woman produces the show. Give her flowers. Of course she understands diversity. I agree. Chandra is definitely royalty class. She is a queen. I would love nothing more than to meet her. And if I ever did, I'm pretty sure I'd be holding in a massive fan fart the entire time. That doesn't stop the fact that this person is also not quite understanding in the opposite way. And my biggest problem here with all of this discourse is that a conversation that really should be, hey, we really need to uplift South Asian, Eastern Asian, and all other Asian communities alike. Isn't it incredible that Bridgerton is providing this representation and not tokenizing Asians to just be like, oh, well, we did one. Tick. That wonderful conversation is instead turning into, South Asian versus Eastern Asian? Fight, fight, fight. And that in turn is then boiled down into Indian versus Chinese. Fight, fight, fight. All of which is entirely detracting from, hey, white people need to share. Let's not forget that. And that is my problem with the term AAPI. All this to say, coming full circle, for anybody doing AAPI events, South Asian people are Asian too. The confusions over the term is very frustrating, but it doesn't mean that you can then just focus on one kind of Asian and be like, nailed it. It doesn't work that way, but it just doesn't. If you are holding AAPI events specifically, make sure that you are representing and authentically including all AAPI identities. Because I'm telling you right now, if I as a brown person walked into a room that was supposed to be an API gala, I would feel very uncomfortable being the only guest there who happened to be a brown person, especially if that was an event where I was supposed to feel like my community is accommodated and included and highlighted specifically. That is not a job well done. And as we continue to see incredible Asian representation that covers the entire broad range of what Asian means, we also need to allow the communities the nuance required to allow rights to meaningfully progress and strive for actual equality, which isn't going to happen if we're just scooping up all of the leftovers and putting them in one bag, America. You hear me? No. I personally do not think that AAPI cuts it, and I think as a society we need to do better for Eastern Asians, for South Asians, for Pacific Islanders, and for all other kinds of Asian communities alike. Alright, I babbled on enough. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to see more. I'm sure there'll be conversation. I'm very happy for you to have it. Just remember to be kind downstairs in the comments section, and I'll catch you next time with another video. Be kind and have a great day. Bye.